We are living in a very dangerous time right now. We are prepared for it, but things are most likely going to get worse. With the escalation that we're witnessing overseas right now, we know that things even here at home could become much more difficult for us very soon. And there's some things I want you to consider surrounding the situation over there that you might not have thought about yet. Keep in mind that yes, rising fuel costs are already hurting us financially, and we know that those will eventually apply to everything when it comes to trucking, cargo, shipping, logistics, everything else that's related to fuel consumption is going to become more expensive, which is what's spurring more inflation, which is going to make our lives much more difficult. But I will tell you that if we do see a hot conflict World War III situation actually break out, it will get much worse than it already is, and we will feel the pain of it regardless of whether or not that conflict makes it to our shores. Now, here's something I want you to think about and consider because of how dangerous the situation is right now and how much more dangerous things will become if they last longer. The longer this whole thing goes on for, the more likely something very bad is going to happen. I just recently watched the movie The Sum of All Fears for maybe the fourth or fifth time, right? And it is a movie that came out in 2002, and it's based on a Tom Clancy novel that was written in 1991. So this has been out for a while in the sense of the content itself. But in this movie, the reason I want you to kind of think about what happens in this movie, maybe suggest that it's something you should watch or at least read the novel if you'd like. Basically, Russia and the United States find themselves on the brink of World War III due to the fact that a rogue entity that had ties to some, let's just say, negative parties from our past decided to move things forward in that progression in order to basically create a World War III scenario and reset the clock of the global situation we find ourselves in right now. So at the end of the day, the whole concept of the movie that also involves Ukraine, because that's where they decided to build this bomb at the time, they set up and framed Russia for a nuclear attack on American soil in order to force America's hand into a global conflict. And just based on everything that's happening right now, I thought it was kind of an interesting watch or read, depending on whichever way you like to consume your media, and gives you some things to think about. Because basically what's happening in Ukraine right now is that those people are becoming more and more desperate every single day that goes by. And we know that with the Russian aggression that keeps closing in, especially on their major cities, people are going to try to look for alternative answers. And with Zelensky coming out just today saying that they've lost over 1,300 soldiers, can't verify that information, but that's just what's being said. We know that they are taking losses and that makes things more difficult when it comes to defending the country as well as logistics. So, what would a country do in order to force foreign involvement, which was probably necessary for them to actually win this war? Russia is a huge military machine. Don't be fooled for a second that Ukraine, the country of the size that they are, could easily deter a Russian invasion. Russia's taken their time, they're being very strategic, and there's a lot of reasons for why this is taking so long, according to the mainstream media. So, at the end of the day, their best hope is to get foreign involvement, which is why you see calling for no-fly zones, is why you see NATO trying to, give foreign aid and supplies where they can without crossing that, red line that might actually push us into World War III. But at the end of the day, Ukraine needs more intervention. They need foreign entities to come in and supply military aid as well as funding to get things really moving in the right direction. Very similar to what the Americans had to do during the Revolutionary War when we asked for French help during that time, especially when it came to being able to fill our pocketbooks and when it came to having troops and ships and everything else we needed in order to fight a much bigger, much more powerful entity in Great Britain. So, when you're desperate and you're backed up against a wall and you're in a country that's being invaded, are you not going to do whatever you might have to do to win that war? That's a question you should ask yourself. And I would expect anybody here in the United States, especially you Pro-2A supporters out there, to do whatever you had to do to win a battle against a foreign aggressor that was here on our land and was not welcome. And yet, to expect Ukraine not to be able to put some of these concepts into play is naive. They will do what they have to do to get foreign involvement. And if that means creating a situation that forces someone's hand based on the fact that something happened that was much larger than what should be allowed based on the current situation, well, they might have to do that. So there's a lot of talk about Russia coming in with cyber attacks and hurting the United States, which would then force NATO's hand in order to get involved. There's a lot of talks about the United States doing something here within our own country in order to justify involvement. And there's not much talk about the fact that Ukraine are actually the ones who have the most to lose and the most to gain by creating a situation that forces NATO to act. This is something you should definitely consider. It's something I was thinking about while watching that movie for, like I said, the 4th or 5th time, but also something that isn't being spoken about very much right now, because we know that anything that happens there would be easily blamed on Russia because of all the news media that's already coming out about what it is they're doing in the sense of possible war crimes, right? We're seeing the bombing of health facilities, we're seeing kindergartens, everything else related to what we would not want to see happen in the sense of collateral damage, and it's being blamed on Russia, of course, because that's what's happening over there right now. But at the end of the day, it would be very easy to have anything else happen that could be catastrophic and blame them because the narrative has already been set, the stage is already set, and everybody's already on the same page as to Russia bad and we have to do something. Public sentiment is on its way up. We know that people in this country are pushing for involvement. And it's generally the same people who don't tend to spend a lot of time learning or researching things, and it's also the kind of people who don't understand the consequences of starting such a global catastrophe. But that's what we're seeing a lot of, and with more public sentiment pushing towards that, and with a failing administration right now in office, and regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, you have to admit that this is a failure of an administration. Nothing is going well right now, and we are not the country that we once were. So these are things to consider. One way to kind of bring that public approval back to a failing administration is to do what it is the public wants, which is to get involved. And this should concern you. This should definitely have you worried. So there's a lot of dangerous things in play right now that can move us into a very dangerous territory. And I just sit here and think about these things and feel that I need to share them with you because honestly, at this point in time, I'm just going to keep preparing. You're just going to keep preparing. We're going to do what we can while we can. But if this thing pops off, I mean, this is what we prepared for. These dangerous times is literally why we do what we do. And if we're not doing it, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. And if we're waiting because this whole thing's going to blow over, well, we saw how that worked 2 years ago with the crisis of 2020. Still hasn't quite exactly blown over. It just shifted into a new crisis, which is honestly much scarier than anything that happened back then. Let's be honest. This is going to be a very difficult situation for the entire world for quite a while. And if nothing comes of this, then we should all be very thankful because that is the outcome that we should be hoping for right now, based on the fact that anything else is very, very bad for both you and I, regardless of whether or not it happens here or there. Things are just going to get worse for both of us. And that's just what I wanted to share with you today. It's just something that's been on my mind. And after watching that movie and really thinking about some of the concepts that were within that novel, and Tom Clancy is a very well-informed author, and yes, he passed away, I believe, but at the end of the day, his writing was well-researched. So there was a lot of reasons for the information in his novels to have that realistic feeling to it. And unfortunately, that realistic feeling is starting to project itself onto our current situation. And that's what has me concerned. So leave me your thoughts down in the comments, and let's just keep an open line of communication. Make sure you jump into the Discord and have a way to network with other people in your area. I'll put a link to that down in the description below as well as in the pinned comment. But at the end of the day, I mean, we got to just keep moving forward. So keep preparing, do what you can, don't panic, and keep an eye on what's happening. Because if you're not paying attention just because you don't want to panic, that's going to hurt you as well. Information is very important, and we need as much as we can right now. And that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.